Hi Booktube, it's Amy. I'm here with my Friday reads. So in the past week I did finish reading The Prime Minister by Anthony Trollope. That's this one here, and I really enjoyed this one. This is probably my favorite Trollope novel that I've read so far. It is one of the novels in the Pallisers series, but I've been reading the Palliser series out of order. And so Phineas Finn does make a few appearances here. He is still in the government, but this novel isn't really about Phineas Finn or about his wife, Mrs. Finn. Rather, it is about the Duke of Omnium and his wife, the Duchess. At the beginning of the novel, the Duke is asked by the Queen to form a government, and so he does so, and he becomes Prime Minister, and his wife, the Duchess, is quite eager to fulfill what she feels are the social obligations of the role. And on the other hand, the Duke, the new Prime Minister, is quite content to go on exactly how he has been, and he sees no need to entertain extravagantly as his wife wishes to do. He sees no need to pander to people or to really behave in any other way that he hasn't done in his life previously. And his wife's ambition, of course, leads to several issues later on in the novel, including her support of a man by the name of Ferdinand Lopez, who is one of our other main characters within this novel. And Ferdinand Lopez is a self-made man. He is new money. He earns his money through speculation, and so he's essentially gambling in the market, so to speak. He invests a bunch of money in a certain good or product and expects to make his money off of it when it is brought to England and sold. And he's done quite well for himself up until the point when this novel opens. Everyone believes him to be a gentleman. He is dining with the best society. He gets invited to the Prime Minister's house by the Duchess. The Duchess takes him under her wing in a way, and it is hinted that he might be able to get into politics. But his secret is that he really doesn't come from money at all. Although his mother was an Englishwoman, his father was Portuguese, and this poses a problem as he wants to marry Emily Wharton, the daughter of a very well-respected gentleman. And Mr. Wharton has several objections. First of all, everybody has wanted Emily to marry the family friend Arthur Fletcher, and so that's been expected for years, that Emily is going to marry Arthur Fletcher. She is going to inherit from her father her £60,000 and live a perfectly happy and respectful existence. But then she catches sight of Ferdinand Lopez, falls in love with him, and begs her father to allow her to marry him. And there is this slightly uncomfortable scene where Mr. Lopez goes to Mr. Wharton and requests her hand in marriage, requests permission to speak to her about marriage. And Mr. Wharton's only real objection is that Mr. Lopez is not a gentleman. He's not an Englishman. His father was Portuguese, and despite being told repeatedly that Mr. Lopez is English and is a Christian, Mr. Wharton keeps making the accusation that Mr. Lopez is a Jew. And so he objects to Mr. Lopez on a number of prejudicial points that have absolutely nothing to do with his ability to provide for his daughter Emily or with his standing as a wealthy gentleman. In fact, he doesn't even inquire about Mr. Lopez's money. He just assumes that Mr. Lopez does indeed have the proper money and social standing for his daughter. But Emily, of course, pushes back, and although she tells her father that she won't marry against his wishes, she puts pressure on him little by little, hoping that he'll give way. And so you have the story of Mr. Lopez and Emily, and the story of the Duke and Duchess of Omnium, the Duke of Omnium being the Prime Minister. And as we have their stories continuing through the extent of the novel, their paths, of course, intercross. And I think one of the things that makes this novel so good is that we don't get bogged down in the weeds of a host of other characters, as often happens with Trollope novels. Trollope is fairly straight to the point in this novel, and we're not spending too much time in other people's heads or in other side stories. And there is a good ratio of back and forth between the two main plots of the novel, and I more or less found myself rooting for Emily, of course, and then for a gentleman by the name of Arthur, who also has a small role to play in this novel. And I think Ferdinand Lopez is probably one of Trollope's best villains, if you want to call him that. That's appeared in the novels I've read by him so far, because Ferdinand Lopez is not objectively a bad man or a bad character, but he certainly is not someone you would like to know. He is bad with money. He's practically hemorrhaging money here. He presents himself under false pretenses, and he is quick to anger and quick to challenge anyone who might even hint at offending him. And I quite enjoyed reading the novel and reading about the characters here. So I finished that, and then I have read about half of this big biography on Alexander Mackenzie, the second Prime Minister of Canada. And I am learning all sorts of wonderful things about him. So he was born in Scotland, and he moved to Canada, settling first in Kingston and then in Sarnia, Ontario, in his 20s. And his family from Scotland eventually followed him, so his mother and his brothers, and their family became quite prominent in Sarnia and in Canadian politics. And eventually he did become the second Prime Minister of Canada. And it's a very interesting story to read about, because he was a tradesman. He was apprenticed as a stonecutter in Scotland, and carried on that trade in stone cutting and in construction once he moved to Canada. I'm a little bit disappointed because the book itself isn't really too clear on how he made that jump from manual labor to politics. It is made known that his brother Hope went into politics first, and that it was only when Hope decided not to rerun for his seat in an election that Alexander was asked to take that seat in his place. And the book itself is, although it's marketed, quote, as a biography, it's both a biography and a history of the political issues of the time, and so it's interesting in that regard as well. And I did film a bit of an impromptu ramble about it on the weekend, so if you would like to hear more about this book, you can go find that from a few days ago. So then I'm also listening to an audio book. I did finish Radical Wordsworth by Jonathan Bate over the weekend, and I quite enjoyed that one. Was certainly interesting to learn about Wordsworth. I'd never read a biography of him before. I've only just recently gotten back into his poetry in a more serious way. But I did finish that biography, which was excellent, by the way, and I'd highly recommend that. But as I finished that, I did go to purchase another audiobook. And I had long had on my to buy list The Secret History by Donna Tartt, because I'd heard great things about that one. I'd heard some not so great things about it too, and as I've been listening, I do understand those not so great points. The main character isn't exactly likable, and there are some very cringeworthy and almost coincidental, and oh look, everything worked out just to set up this moment. There are some moments in the book like that, and I admit I did almost DNF it within the first half hour of listening, just because there were a few portions that were just cringe to me. But I had sufficient interest in other parts about the book that I did continue on, and I'm glad I did. I'm just finished part 1 of the book, so a little over halfway through, and I am really enjoying it. It's got a very unique and interesting setting, and definitely a unique atmosphere to the book. So it takes place at a arts college in the United States, and the main character, he is studying classics, and he arrives at this arts college, this arts university, with the intention of studying English and a couple of languages and just sort of getting this general arts degree. He has dropped out of med school in California, moved out here on a scholarship in opposition to his parents' wishes. And if I'm recalling correctly, this school is in Vermont or something like that. But so he's moved to the other side of the country against his parents' wishes in his early 20s, and he had studied a little bit of Latin at his previous college, and so he wanted to study Latin again, but he discovers that the only Latin professor at this school is very exclusive. He only teaches a select handful of students, and those students are required to, first of all, have him as their academic advisor. His name is Julian, so Julian wants all his students to have him as his academic advisor, and they must take pretty much all their courses with him. And so when our main character is inquiring, at first he's sort of rebuffed, and then he has a chance encounter with this group of students. The current group of students are the twins, Charles and Camilla, which, I mean, that's a little bit cringe that they're called Charles and Camilla. I'm sure that's not a coincidence. You have Bunny, who is giving off the appearance of being wealthy, but really isn't wealthy at all, and he's a little bit erratic and a little bit dishonest and often a little bit mean. And then you have, and I'm suddenly forgetting the other characters' names. You have Francis, and there is one more student there as well. But so you have this group of students, many of them quite wealthy, and in comes our main character on his scholarship, just straight up lying about who he is. And that's really what made me almost DNF it, because for a character who supposedly lies on a regular basis, he's not so great at coming up with his lies on the spur of the moment, and he seems very awkward and nervous in doing it, despite concocting these elaborate stories. And there's really no solid explanation given as to why he feels the need to concoct these elaborate stories, but he does. And at the same time, there were some scenes that almost seemed surplus or irrelevant. So for instance, he is working for another professor on campus, and we have this scene where he goes to ask for some advance pay. And, well, first of all, I thought it was pretty unrealistic because the professor ends up pulling out his checkbook and cutting a check directly to the student. And I don't know what kind of weird-ass university this is, but unless things were significantly different in previous decades, when you're working for a professor, the professor isn't pulling out his personal checkbook and writing you your salary. Rather, you are getting paid by the university itself. But so that was a bit of a weird scene, but I didn't have too much of a problem with the manner of payment. It was rather this sort of unnecessary scene where he goes and asks for an advance on his paycheck because he, quote, really needs the money, but really he just, wants some money to go and spend and burn, more or less. But the professor asks him why, and he says, oh, it's an emergency. And the professor inquires more, and so he says, it's for my car, which is a bit weird because our main character does not have a car. And so we get this really boring conversation where they're talking about the supposed thing that's wrong with his car. And I'm not sure what purpose this conversation served in the novel. And in fact, we had 2 conversations about the car. And I am many, many pages in the book beyond that. And it hasn't come up again. At this point, it just seems irrelevant. In fact, I'm not quite sure why the author bothered to include this other professor at all. And then, of course, there's some moments where the character decides, oh, I need this clothing, I need that, and someone, magically walks by and says, oh, I've got a jacket you can wear, and so he gets this, classy jacket to wear out to a restaurant just at the precise moment. And I also almost quit the book when he goes out for this lunch with a certain character. And the character had said, lunch is on me. And they sit for hours, get really drunk, and consume several $100s worth of food and alcohol. And I knew what he was walking into because the bill arrives and the guy who said he was going to pay starts polishing his glasses because this basically con man who likes to use people for money just assumed that his lunch partner would have a ton of cash or a credit card on him and would automatically pay for the lunch if he said he didn't have the money himself. And so they're just stuck in this expensive restaurant and neither one of them can pay. And that to me is just cringe. Do not eat somewhere if you don't have the money to pay if necessary. Seems pretty common sense to me. But those cringy scenes aside, I've really gotten into the audiobook, and I've been enjoying the dynamic of the characters as well as the atmosphere that this group of kids puts off as they're learning. So they're immersed in Latin and Greek and in the classics, and I don't know, it's just a really interesting atmosphere in the book. Although, the school itself seems to exist sort of in this cloud-like world cut off from everything else, and I don't know what other people's, school experiences were, but they are drinking an obscene amount of alcohol in this book. And for people who don't have all that much spending money, they certainly spend quite a lot. So there's that factor, but we'll see whether I like it in the end. I have gotten to the murder in the book, and the murder itself is quite bizarre, but bizarre in a good way. And I've gotten to the second murder in the book as well, but I won't reveal much more than that. But I am interested to see in the second half what the psychological effect is on this group of students, and what role their Professor Julian, who almost has a paternal approach to his students, what role he's going to play in the aftermath here. So in addition to that, I did start reading The Friendship, Wordsworth and Coleridge by Adam Sisman. I'm only a few pages into this, but I am quite impressed with the introduction, because Sisman spends some time talking about how, because of the falling out that Wordsworth and Coleridge had quite deep into their friendship, there is the tendency for contemporary fans of the author and for critics to end up picking a side almost in the argument and the feud between the two authors. And you often have people who love Coleridge and hate Wordsworth, or love Wordsworth and hate Coleridge, and it's, I guess, rare, according to the author, to get a balanced view of both authors, because there's no need to despise one if you happen to like the other, because they were, of course, friends, and they did influence each other. And so Sisman says that he is going to try to take that balanced view, and that this book is not about their feud, it's about their friendship and about the work they created and how they influenced each other. So this should be quite interesting to read on with. And I think this weekend I might reread an Agatha Christie here, and Then There Were None. I sort of bought this on a whim for $10 off Amazon, because it popped into my mind in the last few days, and I thought it would be fun to reread. This is, I think, one of my favorite Agatha Christie novels. It's the one where the group of people end up at this dinner party at this house for the weekend, and one by one they all sort of get knocked off by a killer. And then I've got one last book on the go here, and this is one that arrived in the mail today. I'd had it on my wish list for a little while as well, but I was purchasing some other books that actually haven't arrived yet, but this one did come today. And this is a translation of an Italian book that was published in 2016. It was translated into English in 2019 by Todd Pornowitz. And this is Long Live Latin, The Pleasures of a Useless Language by Nicola Gardini. And so this is really a explanation of why he thinks it's worth it to learn and to study Latin, and the impact that some of the key Latin writers have had on our literature and on our worldview today. And so I'm about halfway through here, and I'm quite enjoying it. It's really making me want to read Cicero in English, obviously, because obviously I'm not reading Latin. I don't know a word of Latin, but to read Cicero in English, because I've never read Cicero, and maybe to explore some of these other authors that he is mentioning as well. And I don't know, like I don't have the time or energy to suddenly begin to try to teach myself Latin, but he is making quite a case for it, and I would be intrigued to maybe give it a try someday. Not anytime soon, because French is my priority, but I don't know, maybe someday Latin. So that's an interesting little book that's fairly recent into English as well. So that's my reading. That's what I've been up to. Do let me know if you've read any of these in the comments below, and I hope you all have a great weekend.